Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Claire Alloway. I'm a part of the marketing. So for that, I am going to jump into the overall agenda and then I'll pass it over to Chris to start us off. So as you can see here, we are finishing up the welcome and intro right now. And then we'll go into the top of the funnel benchmark data, the pre-apply section of the funnel, and then into the bottom of the funnel benchmark, the post-apply. And finally, we'll give you some key takeaways to bring back to your day-to-day along with that Q&A that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to pass it off to Chris to give you a little intro about himself.
Thanks so much, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. Getting a little echo there. It is great to see so many names, though not faces. Kind of old friends are in the audience here, so it's lovely to talk to you all again. If I haven't met you before, my name is Chris Foreman. I'm the founder and CEO of Applicants. But what I've done is I've spent the last 20 years of my career, working with really awesome teams to build and grow recruiting technology companies. Started about 20 years ago with a company called Ayers that built the first generation recruitment CRM platform in the U.S. and also was known for a lot of its recruitment training, and then to run technology at one of the largest RPOs in the U.S. and then to found and start, to rec tech companies directly, StartWire and now Appcast. I seemingly am a recruiting geek. I like to give a lot of talks. I've got a tremendous passion for talent acquisition for a whole variety of reasons. And, Matt and I was trying to count up. I think this is the 5th or 6th talk that we've given together, and so always enjoy doing these. Also, a lot of the stuff that I talk about kind of comes from some quiet time that I have when I'm working on our family farm. Angela and I we've got 4 kids. We live in upstate New Hampshire, and we live on a little dairy farm. So I've got cows as well as pigs and sheep and chickens. And candidly, I often think about what I'm going to be saying in these meetings as I'm shoveling manure in the barn. And my beautiful bride sometimes says that there's a correlation between what I'm shoveling and what I'm saying. So hopefully that isn't the case today. But with that, to my partner in crime, Matt.
All right, thank you, Chris. And yeah, it's great to be working with you again on this. We've been doing this for a number of years, and much like Chris, I've spent my career in HR and recruiting on the vendor side. I'm a big fan of the data, so we're kind of geeks in arms, Chris and I, and so I think this is a really relevant topic, and part of the reason we continue to do it together each year is I'm a big believer in being grounded in the data, and I think that what has led to the emergence of the CMO in my line of business as a marketer, and what's also led to the CHRO has been that emergence of data in both of our worlds. And so I think there's a lot of best practices that we can share between marketers and recruiters, and we'll be going over a lot of that in today's call. And I'm jealous. I'm not fortunate enough to live on a farm. I'm out here on the West Coast in the concrete jungle of Silicon Valley, but I do try to get out to the coast and spend as much time in the water as I can, and enjoy doing that with my kids. So that's kind of how I spend my personal time. But again, excited to take you guys through the benchmarks and to share some of the year-over-year changes that we're seeing now that we have enough history with this report to start to spot some trends, and hopefully highlighting those trends will lead to some actionable insights that those of you on today's webinar can put into practice in your everyday lives. So yeah, let's jump into it. So I think part of what we wanted to do was just to quickly set the stage of what's happening in today's labor market, and this isn't anything new for most of you since you're steeped in the recruiting world and probably fighting that fight to find and hire the top talent. But what we really have is kind of a perfect storm in the labor market right now as far as the hiring side of the equation. So unemployment is at historic lows. We've been bouncing around between the high 3s and the low 4s. And then, within the nuance of that is the sort of 2-tiered labor market that we have here in the U.S. And so we have sort of a white-collar and a blue-collar labor market, and the white-collar is where most of you are struggling to hire. I believe unemployment for kind of hourly and non-technical positions is hovering more at sort of 6 to 8%, and the skilled labor market is really below 3%, which effectively is zero unemployment. It's just people changing jobs. So if you're hiring for those skilled positions, those STEM jobs, I'm sure you're feeling the pain of this unemployment rate. Some of the things that are driving the talent war that we're seeing out there is not just the amount of the low level of unemployment, but also the kind of brain drain and education issues that we're seeing in the United States. So the U.S. has continued to sort of slip in the world spectrum of top institutions and education, particularly on the STEM side. We have a huge gap between the degrees being issued and the amount of positions that are available in roles like computer science, statistics, app development, engineering, and so on. So, the education problem further compounds the issue. Another piece is that classic boomers leaving the workforce component that we've been hearing about for a number of years, and we're still in the midst of that. And so, with this huge contingent of labor leaving and being replaced by the new millennials and Gen Zs, brings with it a new demographic and new behaviors among those workers. And so there's a lot of unique things about the new labor market, but one of the big ones with millennials is their ability to do research and evaluate companies before they ever engage with them, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. And so really what that means, and it's the same thing we're seeing in marketing, which is prospective buyers, or in your case prospective hires, have done a ton of research up front before they ever engage with you guys as HR and recruiters. And so that leads to two possible outcomes. If you're being transparent and providing a good insight into your employer brand, it can be a positive thing. It can help folks to move through the funnel faster, have a better understanding of what they can expect when they do join the company, and remove some of those barriers that you might have found when you had to educate them about the brand during the hiring process. That has often happened ahead of time in the current kind of state of the labor market. So some of the negative outcomes, though, can be, in the actual apply process itself, right? So the way that your apply process is set up, the number of questions you're asking, whether or not it's a mobile experience, all these things significantly impact your conversion rates from those viewing the positions to actually completed applies. And Appcast has some really compelling research around this stuff, and I would encourage you to visit their website and take a look at some of the reports that highlight the number of questions that are key in terms of you hit diminishing returns. I believe that's something like 15 questions, so you need to be really thoughtful about that, as well as the job descriptions that you're writing, so we'll talk about that. So you can see here from the survey data that we have, over half of these job seekers are abandoning the apply process if it's too complicated. And then even worse, they go out on social media and they share those negative experiences with broader social and also their personal networks. And then almost 90% of those folks have reported that they won't consider your company again after a bad hiring experience. And so this last one is a key example where we're seeing marketing and recruiting continue to converge in terms of the employer brand and the corporate brand, and that these guys not only are not going to apply at your company, but they're also not going to purchase your products and services. So marketers really need to be collaborating and working with recruiters to have a unified experience, not just with the corporate brand, but also with the employer brand. And so, because you really need to provide that white glove experience, it really highlights the need to be selective about those folks that you're getting to apply, and the job boards are a huge source of those applies. And so I think Chris was going to take us through some of the stuff that Appcast has found on that side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And a little bit of background. The Appcast, the business, we build software that helps recruiters, hiring organizations, and marketers to manage their pay-for-performance job ad advertising more effectively. So our software is used by the gig providers. 85% of the largest recruitment advertising agencies, half the major job boards, 500 major companies, to help basically optimize and improve and optimize their cost per click ad buying from all the major providers, whether it be Indeed, Glassdoor, ZipRecruiter, Monster Career Builder, Google, anyone. So the data that we're about to share, and we've shared over the years with Matt and our friends at Jobvite, basically looks at what our software tracks across the entire ecosystem around the performance of job ads. And to give you a sense of the scale here, last year, 1.4 billion job ad clicks were bought and optimized by our software globally. So this isn't a small data set. This is a big data set. In previous conversations that Matt and I have had, we've shared lots of really interesting data. Like there was one talk that Matt and I gave where the part that we brought to the table was an analysis of the length of your online application and the impact that has on your recruiting costs. And Matt mentioned it. The longer the apply process, the fewer the people get through it. And if you're buying recruitment advertising on a cost per click basis or even on a per posting basis, if you have more people abandon your online application process, your overall recruiting costs go up. And that was right. There's a kind of a magic break point. It's an application that takes 5 minutes or less, which is about 15 questions. A 5-minute application saves you about 385% in your candidate sourcing costs compared to the standard online application, which takes about 15 minutes. Another time, we also looked thematically at something that was in line with what Matt was saying in terms of people's brand awareness of your employment brand. So we looked at how the Glassdoor rating of a company impacted the apply rates from advertised jobs. And not surprisingly, we found a correlation between the click to apply rate, which is how many clicks does it take to, what percentage of clicks actually turn into an apply within 48 hours. That the better your Glassdoor rating, the more efficient your recruitment advertising. So this time around, the researchers at Appcast have found something really interesting, and this again kind of sounds obvious. What I'm about to say is, fairly common sense, but nobody's been able to measure it before. So just like it's common sense that the longer your online application, the fewer people who actually get through it. That's common sense. But nobody was ever able to measure that a 5-minute application saves you 385% on your sourcing costs compared to a 15-minute application. And just like having a higher Glassdoor rating means that your recruitment advertising might be a little bit more effective, nobody was able to say that the difference between a 4 and a 3.5 is about 65% in terms of conversions on your job ads. Well, now what the data team at Appcast has found is that there's a positive correlation between higher apply rates and high unemployment, or said conversely, lower apply rates and lower unemployment. And so what we have here is a bit of a headache graph, but this is a scatter graph that looks at the unemployment rate and the apply rate for all 50 states. Well, it's not all 50 because we knocked out some with low data. But what you're seeing here is on the vertical axis the unemployment rate, which is what gets reported in the news all the time. And the unemployment rate for all you kind of data geeks out there is not really the percentage of people that are unemployed in a state. It's the percentage of people that are unemployed that are actually looking for work. So this is a kind of a measure of unemployment rate amongst active job seekers. And then the click to apply rate, or the apply rate, is a function of what percentage of clicks from a job ad on an aggregator or a job site convert to an apply within 48 hours. And what you're going to see here, if you blur your eyes a little bit, is that there is a distinct and what the economists would say a material correlation between a low unemployment rate and a lower click-to-apply rate. And what that means is it's not that that job seekers are looking at fewer jobs. In fact, if you take a look at the views per job across all states, they're relatively static per job seeker. What you're seeing is more selectivity in places where job seekers have more choice because they are in more demand. They will look at more ads, but they will apply to fewer of them compared to job seekers in states where they are in less demand. Now, the take home for this is, again, and there's going to be a really nice report that you guys are all going to get a copy of that will have some of this raw data for you, is that if you are, let's say recruiting across multiple states, you may actually find that in different locales with different unemployment rates, you will change your recruitment advertising strategy. You will spend more in more competitive areas. You'll spend less in less competitive areas, enabled to ensure that you're getting enough applications across all of your requisitions. And as Matt pointed out, you may even find a deviation between, kind of types of positions, unemployment rate within function, within geography. So really interesting stuff. And what's also happening, which is not surprising, is that if you look at the bids that employers and other marketers who buy job advertising on a cost-per-click basis, they're also going up. So lower unemployment rates actually mean people are competing and spending higher amounts on their job ads. And so again, if you take a look at this state, this particular graph here, what you're seeing is the average kind of cost per click. And if you take a look in terms of where things are higher, you're seeing it in manufacturing areas, you're seeing it in areas of high tech demand, you're seeing it in oil and logistics. So really kind of interesting correlations between those two data points. You also see here that just generally there's a correlation between higher CPCs and function. So transportation is by far and away, truck drivers, the most competitive talent labor market in the United States right now, followed very closely by healthcare. The rest of this stuff, quite candidly, is probably less material on an aggregate national basis. I mean, it's somewhat interesting to take a look at how these things play out. But the key thing here, if you blur your eyes, is really the significant delta in CPCs that you see in the two hottest high-demand areas, transportation and healthcare, compared to the rest. All right. Now, this is something that we talk about all the time and in each one of our presentations. And so even though, this is something that, is less to do with broad demographics, it is really, really important for everybody to see. So in this graph, what you're seeing here is you're seeing click-to-apply rates by device, okay? So you've got mobile devices that are, again, things are getting better on the mobile side. In 2016, it's just a little over 4%. In 2017, it's closer to 5%. So desktop, you're seeing a little bit of a reverse of that trend, and I can actually explain why there. It's kind of interesting. And then the overall click-to-apply rate is roughly the same on a blended basis. But the reason why we always put this slide in and talk about mobile is that if you look at the percentage of traffic that comes from job sites, and that job sites may have a bad name, aggregators and job boards, the conventional wisdom that you don't want to buy, kind of active candidates. The bottom line is that a massive amount of the people that get hired end up coming through one of these active channels. Quite candidly, another piece of data that we're looking at is how some ATS coding, clearly not a Jobvite because they always rock, miscategorizes the applies that are credited to the career site rather than job site. And if you have really good tracking, what you end up finding is a massive percentage of hires that are attributed to career site engagement, within a 7-day or a 30-day look back are actually driven, through some type of job advertising. But on the job sites, you're starting to get to, 60 to 70% of traffic is mobile. And so what you're seeing here is the difference between a mobile apply and a desktop apply is massive, almost 2x. If in fact the majority of the traffic that you're buying when you spend your recruitment marketing dollars is in fact on mobile, that means that you're spending a lot of money that is not converting into applies. And so, we just always want to kind of call that out, and if you and your organization are thinking about ways to improve your candidate sourcing outcome, one of the best ways to actually do that is to invest in upgrading and improving your application flow and your mobile apply flow. And, you guys are, Jobvite customers, and data suggests they've got one of the best mobile apply processes in the market. So as you think about, 2018 and 2019, besides hopefully, wanting to learn about, AppCast technology and how we use data like this to optimize your recruitment advertising spend, hopefully you take a look at how you might be able to invest, some of your budget improving your mobile apply flows. Because, imagine if in fact you had a mobile click-to-apply rate that was approaching that of desktop, you could buy significantly less recruitment advertising and have the same number of applicants flowing into your funnel. So anyway, a couple key points here is, to reinforce what Matt said, it's competitive out there. It's getting more competitive. And as it becomes more competitive, your recruitment advertising becomes less effective, meaning more people look at your ads, but fewer of them apply, and the prices that you pay are going up. So you can call me Mr. Happy today. I'm just full of good news. But hopefully Matt will be provide some more interesting and happy news for you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That's great stuff. Very interesting. And I think, sadly, what we're seeing at the bottom of the funnel is very similar. It all sort of cascades from that market data we shared at the beginning about the tight labor market, and it's simply getting harder in a market like this to find good people and attract them and build that talent pipeline. So what we wanted to do is just kind of dig into some of the metrics now and give folks on the call an opportunity to sort of benchmark themselves, see what trends we're seeing, and then also look at those year-over-year trends to see sort of how the market's been shifting in recent years. So yeah, if we can just go to the next slide here. So we're going to start by looking at the source of applicants and the source of hires. And so this is something we also spend a lot of time on in marketing, which is, you don't want to just look at your lead flow, which would be applicants for you guys, but also look at who you're actually hiring, or for us, who are becoming customers. And so it's a classic mistake that marketers make, and I think recruiters fall into this trap as well, which is you just look at where are the applies coming from versus where are you actually finding your hires. It's a natural tendency, right? You want to keep your recruiters busy. You want to keep stuff in the pipeline, so to speak. But you also want to be sure that the quality's there and that those sources are yielding new hires. So if we look first at the source of the two, you can see here we've got the hire percentage as well as the apply percentage. And so, to Chris's point, the job boards drive a huge chunk of the applies, over 50% based on our benchmarks. But if you look at the hires, there's a little bit of loss of effectiveness there. So you've got 51% of applies, but roughly only 20% of your hires. Whereas with the career site, it's more of a one-to-one in terms of effectiveness. Excuse me, you've got 36% of applies and almost the same amount in terms of hires. So the job board piece really reinforces the need for optimization and looking at tools like Appcast to help maximize the spend that you're consuming in your job board channel. And then for the career sites, again, just a huge opportunity. It's almost a third of all of your hires, so really be sure that you're investing the time and effort into your career site, building that employer brand. So if we look at the effectiveness, as I just talked about, you can see, for example, agencies, great effectiveness, but very expensive. Career sites kind of in the middle, pretty good effectiveness, not necessarily a huge cost there. And then the job boards, again, low on effectiveness, but still driving nearly 20% of hires. So definitely an opportunity there to optimize the effectiveness and improve that conversion rate from applies into hires. And so then if we look at some of the other emerging channels, so internal hires, obviously internal mobility is a huge focus for a lot of recruiters out there. We continue to see internal mobility among our own customers as rising in importance with decreasing tenures among the new workforce. One of the big ways that companies are retaining these folks longer is by thinking about their next challenge, having a succession plan, working with folks to understand what their next job will look like within the company so that they don't go find that job elsewhere. You can still see it's less than 10% of hires, so a lot of opportunity to optimize there, but certainly the effectiveness is through the roof and the cost is basically zero, just the labor costs to run the program internally. Similar with referrals, it's always a great source of hires. It's over 10%, so would love to see that number get higher. Best in class among our customers is more like 30%, but there's a broad spectrum on referrals, so this is a good opportunity to look at your referral percentage, benchmark yourself, and if you haven't invested time in your referral program, a good time to re-examine that and see where there's opportunities to optimize that or potentially relaunch it within your organization. And then lastly, custom campaigns. So this is that outbound marketing, outbound recruiting that you guys may be doing. You can see here it's still a very low percentage of hires overall, less than 1%, but the effectiveness is very high and it continues to grow year over year in terms of percent of hires. So something to certainly be thinking about if you aren't doing any outbound recruitment marketing. All right, so then in terms of time to hire, so as we dig into these next 6 or 7 slides, I just wanted to highlight a consistent theme that I saw as we were putting this presentation together. It's getting harder to hire, and so really as you look at the data, we have to speculate on the outcomes, but there's really only 2 explanations as we look at this data, and I just wanted to frame it before we get started. So one is what I already described, which is simply the market's getting tighter, you're getting less candidates, you're being less selective about who you hire, you're moving them through the funnel faster. A small percentage of people, and again, this is anecdotal in talking with our customers, they're bucking that trend by building an employer brand and building a talent pipeline. And especially in a tight labor market like this, one of the only ways that you can continue to find that top talent is really by focusing on that employer brand, giving those passive job seekers visibility into what it's like to work for your company. Let them do that research up front. And then the second phase is to do some of that outbound marketing and build that talent pipeline so that when they move from a passive job seeker to an active job seeker, your company is top of mind for them. So as we dig into the data, building on what I just described, you can see that we continue to see the time to hire decreasing, right? So as the talent crunch continues, recruiters are being forced to move folks through the funnel faster. Again, as I described, some of those best-in-class companies, they claim that that time to hire is not solely due to the tightening labor market, but also the fact that they have a great career site, mobile apply experience, solid presence on Glassdoor, so that the candidates are already very well versed on the company, the organization, the department, and even their specific role before they ever submit an application. And so once they actually start moving through the traditional hiring funnel, they move through those stages very quickly. All right, so in terms of the year-over-year data beyond the time to hire stuff, you can see here again, we've got fewer candidates, so it's taking less time to hire them, and they're moving through the funnel faster. And so again, nothing different than what I just described. We just continue to see a trend, and it's due to one of two reasons, right? It's either just simply those macroeconomic factors, or if you're building that good employer brand, you are not necessarily going to need as many candidates because you've got a higher quality of apply. And then the rate of interviews is relatively unchanged. We're more seeing this downstream. So one point to make here is that, it's been roughly a tight cluster. So if you're thinking about benchmarking yourself, we don't see a huge variation in this one. So you can assume that something like 1 in 10 or a little bit better is a fair conversion rate between those folks that apply and those folks that you're interviewing. And again, this is due to either of those factors. You need to kind of be introspective about your own organization, whether or not you would attribute this to having a great employer brand, so that the folks who apply are already a better fit. So things like job descriptions, are you investing the time to write a thorough and comprehensive job description? Or is it simply due to the fact that the labor market's really tight and you're having to lower your standards on those folks that you convert from applications to interviews? Again, it's really case by case and something to sort of examine within your own organization, talk to your recruiting team about, and sort of make a determination about that within your own company. In this one, we're seeing a good trend here. So, and again, the theme is over and over. It's so consistent throughout the data, but I'll just keep reinforcing it. So we're seeing, again, a similar percentage of folks making it from apply to hire, but a consistently increasing percentage of folks getting from the interview to the offer. Same exact explanation, right? It's only one of two outcomes as far as we can tell. You're either doing a great job up front, so you're interviewing the right people, or the market's tight and you're sort of limited on your talent pool and you're being forced to lower the bar and extend offers to candidates that might not have qualified in a tighter labor market 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, and then interviews to offers. So not a huge fluctuation here. It's been bouncing around between 80 and 90% over the last 3 to 4 years. One thing that we've heard from some recruiters is simply have more money in organizations, doing a better job of benchmarking on salaries. Glassdoor and other companies are adding transparency to salaries within companies, so it's forcing folks to be more competitive, but also, in a strong up economy like this, organizations have more money to spend on labor and therefore can put out more competitive offers. All right, so if I was going to, highlight some of the key takeaways, and Chris, chime in here, but we've got the lower unemployment and the macroeconomic trends that we described at the top of the hour really driving a lot of what we're seeing in the data. Chris mentioned the local importance and kind of understanding those markets. You've really got to know how things vary from one market to another, particularly on the job board strategy and the stuff that Appcast is doing. The mobile device stuff that Chris talked about is critical, right? I mean, if you don't have a mobile apply process and a mobilely optimized career site, it's definitely time to look into that as an organization. And then when we looked at the bottom of funnel stuff, we see a lot of trends shifting upwards, and again, it's due to one of two outcomes. And so I'm not going to make that determination for each of you, but it's certainly clear in the data. And I think, a reminder to really take that time, pull up out of the individual recs that you're filling. Just like us as marketers, you get caught up in wanting to, meet the needs of for us, sales organization, for you guys, your hiring teams, and filling the recs of today. But you really need to be thinking about that long-term employer brand and building that talent pipeline. We've got decreasing tenures and a very tight labor market. So, this is the year, I think, of the employer brand, and to really think about what you're doing with your job board strategy, your career site strategy, and building that kind of long-term brand equity among job seekers. Chris, anything you want to add here, sort of in parting thoughts? You still there?
I believe Chris actually just got kicked out of the audio. Claire, if you want to add him back in.
And in the meantime, I see a bunch of questions coming in here, so we're going to, let's get Chris back on the line, and then we can kind of close out with any parting thoughts from him, and then we can start to field some of these questions, since it looks like we've got 10 to 15 minutes left for that.
Absolutely. So let's start off with just a larger question. Angela wanted a recap on where was all of this data obtained from? And maybe, Matt, if you want to start off with our side, and I'll work on getting Chris back in.
Sure. So for the stuff that I shared, the actual apply metrics through the through the funnel, what we do here at Jobvite, so we have over 60 million job seekers who have applied to various Jobvite customers, and we aggregate and anonymize all of that data. And we have these standard stages in the funnel, the ones that we talked about. So, site visitors to applies to interview, interview to offer, and so on. And so we anonymize that data and produce the benchmarks based on what we're seeing inside of the Jobvite platform. And on the Appcast side, I believe it's something similar, but I don't want to misspeak. Do we have Chris back on the audio now, or?
Annie, do you think you can take that of where the benchmark data comes from on your end?
Yeah, so this is, all of this data is from our 2018 benchmark report study. We're in the process of creating our benchmark report now, and everyone who's registered for this webinar will get access to it in just a few weeks. It's our annual report.
Yeah, so the Appcast one's forthcoming in the next couple of weeks, and then the Jobvite benchmark report was completed back in late February, and so in the first quarter of each year, we look at the benchmarks from the previous year and roll out that report. So that's available on the Jobvite website, and then we also have a survey of job seekers, which couples really nicely with this, where we survey a couple thousand job seekers across the U.S., different than the benchmark report, not necessarily all job seekers at Jobvite companies, but simply folks who are in the market looking for work. And so there's also some really interesting information in there to kind of reconcile the benchmark data with what we're learning from job seekers out there in the market.
Perfect. So we have a question from Adam, and he asks, what qualifies as a bad hiring experience?
Yeah, and I think that one was from the slide that I showed at the top, and that was simply a survey question. So it was a multiple choice question that was asked of candidates, asking them, and we just called it, a bad hiring experience. So the devil's in the details there. I think anecdotally, what I can share in talking with candidates and recruiters in my travels around to trade shows and our own Jobvite events, the number one factor for bad hiring experience, above and beyond anything else we hear, is the black hole resume experience. So if I was going to give one piece of feedback on what we hear from job seekers that gets them out on social posting negative comments about a hiring process, is the idea that they applied for a job and just never heard back. And so the rejection part of what you guys do as recruiters isn't always the funnest. I mean, the reality is you guys are in the rejection business more than you're in the hiring business. If you think about how many candidates you actually have to screen and reject to find one hire. But I would encourage you to always close the loop with every candidate. There's nothing worse for them than to get excited about a position, feel like they're a perfect fit, submit a resume, and then never hear anything back. And then the second one is the day of interview logistics. So that's the other big one that we hear from candidates, which is they come into an organization, much like we talked about in the webinar, they've done tons of research, they feel like they have a good understanding of the company from the outside looking in, and this is finally their opportunity to see the company from the inside. And then they come in, they sit in a room for a half an hour, the organization of the interview schedule is not well coordinated. All four interviewers ask them the same 5 questions over and over again, and they really don't walk away feeling like either side has been fulfilled. They don't feel like they get a chance to highlight enough of their skill set, and they also don't feel like they learn enough about the company. So there's a lot in there in terms of bad hiring experience, but if I was going to call out the two biggest ones we hear about, it's closing the loop with candidates up front and then having a really tight process for those day of interview logistics.
Great. So we have a question from Karen about do video interviews and assessments prior to interviewing scare off some talent? Just curious about all of this from a talent pool perspective.
Yeah, so I can speak to it from the Jobvite side, which is, we have a video tool that does, outbound interview questions. It's not a two-way interview process. Our research found that very few hiring managers would ever sit and watch a 30 to 60-minute two-way interview between a recruiter and a candidate. We're bigger advocates for using some screening questions, sending those out via video. We see the best success with it in entry-level positions where you have a handful of candidates that all look very similar on paper. So, you've got folks right out of school, or they all have one or two jobs under their belt, and it's very difficult to differentiate between them based on their resumes. So that's where we see good success with it. But I will agree with you that in some verticals and some markets where it's maybe lower tech or older demographic, folks have some resistance to it. And so, it's just something that I think over time, it was probably an early adopter technology 2 or 3 years ago. It's becoming more and more common now. We find that millennials typically have no issue with it, and they're happy to do the video interviews. So I think it's just something that there's probably still some resistance to it with the older demographic, lower tech demographic, and in rural areas. But we continue to see that shift happening, and I anticipate, in the next 3 to 5 years, it becoming kind of a table stakes part of the recruiting process. But I think it's a good question. I think there is still some resistance in pockets, depending on location and demographic.
Got it. And I apologize to everyone just having some.
Hi guys, this is Chris.
Yay!
Yay! It shouldn't scare anyone that I'm responsible for a technology company, but it took me 5 minutes to get back into a conference call line. But finally I'm here. So, Matt, I could hear you the entire time, and you did a lovely job answering all the questions. So, is there any color I can provide, or are we basically good?
I think we might have had one question that was better suited for the kind of Appcast side of the house, the data, if nothing else, and then I don't know if there's anything else in there, Claire, that came through that was Appcast related, but at least on the data, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about where and how you guys obtain that data. Annie touched on it, but that was one question. And then I had thrown out there just any parting thoughts when I was concluding the presentation before we went to Q&A, if you had anything that you wanted to add.
Sure. So just on the data, as I mentioned, during my little shtick, we build software that helps marketers and recruiters optimize their job advertising. Even though we're only about 4.5 years old, we've been really lucky to be trusted by some of the leading brands and employers globally that buy a lot of recruitment advertising. And as a result, the data that we have is anonymized data, from about 600 of our customers that represent a massive, a very large portion of performance ad buying. And like last year, it was 1.4 billion job ad clicks that were purchased through our platform. So it's longitudinal. It's from ad agencies. It's from job boards. It's from gig providers. It's from lots of Fortune 1000 employers. It's from small, fast-growing companies. All of this is U.S. data. I think that's important to say. And then in terms of just the closing stuff, I mean, I think that we've hit everybody over the head enough about this. Number one is the labor market, in most cases, again, you can never draw complete generalizations, is tightening. People, job seekers, one way of looking at the consumers or your customers that you're endeavoring to sell something to have choices. And when people have choices, they get significantly more discerning in the decisions that they make. And what they're looking for is they are looking for high quality, and they're looking for great value. And they're looking to be treated with respect. And so organizations that are able to communicate their value to job seekers, organizations that pay respect to job seekers and how they're treated and how easy it is to interact with them, perform very, very well in these types of environments. And it exacerbates problems for companies that don't necessarily check the box in those areas. So I guess the bottom piece of advice is just understand that, and there are no magic wands in the world, but wake up every day, use data to inform and benchmark your decisions, and endeavor to make it better every single day.
Okay, so we've got our next question, and it's for Chris. In what cases do you think it's best to buy CPC or CPA ads versus posts?
So it's a good question. When you look across all job ads that are posted online, that are paid to be posted online, about 6% of them get 40% of applicants. About 49% of them in aggregate, 2% of applicants. And then you've got this sliver of about 45% that kind of get about 35% of applicants. And so I always say that this is it's a situation of the classic three bowls of porridge: one too hot, one too cold, one basically okay. For jobs that do not traditionally get lots of applications, buying in performance makes both economic as well as marketing sense, because you're only paying for people that are engaging with your job ad content. It also means because you're doing that, you can advertise in more places for basically the same budget. So said differently, if you have a job where you used to spend $400 on a posting and you would get 2 applications, you can now spend $400 on clicks, but spread that across not 1 site, but 10 sites. And you will get, so if in fact you spend your $400, it means that you spent $400 where people are actually engaging with your ad, and you will most likely get substantively higher application flow. So for that bowl of porridge, clearly buying performance makes sense. For the middle bowl of porridge, the ones that's basically just right, the honest answer is that if you manage your performance advertising effectively, you will get better value there as well. And what effectively means, it means 2 things. Number 1 is turn off your jobs after you've gotten enough applies, okay, so you don't have a runaway job that kind of eats up a bunch of your budget. And the second thing is to bid to market. Oftentimes, recruiters are not marketers, and so, bottom line is they'll listen to salespeople, and they'll bid something that isn't necessarily being driven by market. That's why the AppCast, kind of cost per click benchmark report is so valuable. So if you do those 2 things, you'll probably end up saving some money or spending the same amount of money and getting slightly more applicants if you need a few more. The one area where actually good old-fashioned, straightforward job postings oftentimes provide the greatest value is for positions for jobs that typically have high applicant flow and require a lot of volume. So again, going to that $400 example, if you've got an ad that you can spend $400 for and you can get 600 applications because it's a job that a lot of people want, and in fact you can get multiple hires from those applications. So think call centers or inside sales reps or customer service reps. Oftentimes you'll find for those high volume single hire positions, job postings can be more economically beneficial than not, than even CPC. So anyway, long story short is it's typically a math problem, but that's the basic concept.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to move on to a twofer from Stephanie because they're on similar topics. So what tips can you give for recruiters who are seeking candidates outside of their current location? And she asks more for suggestions on building employment brand across locations with new offices where you might not have as much market presence. And I'm going to start this one off with Matt, and then Chris obviously fill in as you'd like.
Yeah, so a lot of, Jobvite has a history of companies in technology and a lot of healthcare companies, so geo expansion is a big part of our customer base, and I think there's two big ways that we see opportunities from an employer brand perspective, and I think about it as inbound and outbound marketing. And so for the inbound stuff, I would encourage folks on their career site to think about cutting the site up, not just in terms of departments, but also in terms of actual locations. And so there's a lot of good examples out there of companies where you can look not just at, say, what it's like in engineering or in marketing or sales, but also, what is the Raleigh-Durham office like and how does that compare to the San Francisco office? And so including those offices, you can do kind of a simple office tour, even with your own, the phones now are producing such high quality video, you can even do it yourself and post it. And then, so that's some of the ideas around career site. And then in terms of outbound, one of the things we've seen great success with is encouraging your own employees to post stuff out. So just getting employees talking on social media about new offices opening and their excitement around that. And then when we talk about outbound campaigns, one of the classic topics that recruiters like to use for outbound marketing campaigns is the announcement of increased hiring, which is often due to expanding into new geos. And so that would be the other way to do it is, just simply sending outbound emails. And then with sites like LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, you can invest a relatively small amount of spend when you get into geo targeting. So if you're opening an office in Portland, Oregon, for example, you can use those geo filters on sites like LinkedIn and Facebook and focus solely on engineers in the Portland area with a certain skill set in their LinkedIn profile, for example. So you're really hyper-targeting your marketing, which makes it relatively inexpensive, but also, getting after that exact prospective candidate that you're looking for. So those would be kind of a handful of suggestions that I would offer up, Stephanie, on kind of driving awareness into new office locations.
Chris, did you have anything to add to this? You mentioned geo before.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so there's two things. First off, a lot of companies find that they do research about where, there's two things. Number one is getting people interested in relocating to you. Do research about where those people, live, work, and play, in which cities. And then place job ads there, either performance job ads or postings that in the job title explain that, that where the job is and that relocation is paid. It works slick. In fact, you'll typically for those ads have to do some additional writing to explain in the job ad about that and why moving to your area is super cool if it's not Santa Monica or some place like that. But we've got a lot of clients that have found that that technique works really, really, really well with high-end, kind of folks, consultants, medical folks, technologists. But one of the details that kind of gets lost is that for those jobs, and this is a reason why you might want to consider this as a performance ad campaign, meaning cost per click rather than duration-based. Because when you buy a duration-based ad campaign, they ask you for one location, and that's where the job theoretically is. But the way job alerts work, those emails that you get into your inbox, which, dirty secret, drive about 65% of the traffic that job sites have. It's all driven by zip code. And so, you put in your home zip code about where, you live or where you're interested in a job. And then they find matching positions to that zip code and send them to you. If you do this strategy as a performance ad, you can actually spin up lots of versions of those ads for each one of the different zip codes within a particular metro area. And we call this zip code expansion, not a horribly creative name. And it has a massive impact in terms of your ability to get volume. Now, some job sites don't like it. Like Zip will put up with, Indeed will put up with this if in fact it's a tactic to fill a specific job for one or two off. They don't love this type of thing. Like if you're a truck driving company and you constantly have 25,000 of the same jobs just spun up for different zip codes. But it's a really effective way of kind of driving volume. Is to target not to the city but to the zip code.
Perfect. So I think, Chris, we've got time for maybe one more question. It's teed up on job boards as well, and then we will finish it all up. Just as a reminder to everyone, because I know it's getting to the top of the hour, you guys will be receiving the recording and the slides after the webinar, probably in your inboxes tomorrow morning, and then that SHRM credit number in case that's of interest for you guys. So for the last question, we've got something from Adam. The challenge in paying for posting is, for the most part, you either get a low level of volume or a high level of volume, but the quality is low. What's your advice to overcome this? Is paying for performance still paying for people who apply, or just quality CNs that apply?
Yeah, so pay for performance can take lots of different modes. The most common pay for performance advertising is cost per click advertising, where rather than paying for an ad to be posted online or in a newspaper for a certain amount of time, you only pay when somebody actually looks at your ad. Okay, and when they click on onto your ad, and that's the one that's been popularized and commercialized by Google. Outside of the job space, you have cost per action advertising, where you can pay for not somebody clicking on your ad, but actually filling out a form or actually making a phone call, or even there are kind of cost per conversions, where you actually pay only when somebody buys a product. In recruitment, the furthest it's really come down the funnel, unless you're spending literally $1 million a month. And there are people that are, and they're so sophisticated they can buy their traffic in different ways. But the furthest down the performance funnel it's come is to basically pay cost per applicant rather than cost per click. Now, does moving down the funnel, going from paying for posting to cost per click, does that, if it's effectively managed, improve your ROI? Generally speaking, it does. There's a reason why a lot of the duration-based ad companies, that used to sell postings, didn't immediately adopt the pay-per-click model when Indeed started to get traction. The reason being is that it typically is about a 30% haircut. They would sell the same products and they'd make 30% less money. That means that you would end up spending 30% less money. There's a reason why, AppCast, full disclosure, all of the products that we sell on a media basis are cost per applicant. A lot of people talk about it, but there's not a lot of people are chasing us per se, because we represent another 30% haircut from cost per click. Is that if you're paying per applicant, you're not paying for all the wasted clicks and views that occur on an applicant tracking system. But the key thing to understand is that the applicants that titrate through to the bottom line, their quality is a function of where you put your ads and how well they're written and how good your employment brand happens to be. So if what you're saying is that, I've advertised on aggregators and job sites and all sorts of active candidates, and every time I do that, the candidates that I get aren't worth it, there's no way that changing how you pay for the ads is going to change that outcome for you. And also, paying for performance isn't, my mess for less. It's not a guarantee that it's going to just be radically cheaper. But what it is it allows you to start to say, oh, okay, I'm buying from 5 sources. I track, how much each click costs. I track how much each application costs. I then use my Jobvite platform to understand how many of those applies turn into interviews and how many turn into hires. And what I find is that out of my 5 sources, 2 of them are awesome. 2 of them are okay, and 1 sucks. The 2 that are great, I'm going to bid up so that I can get more volume from them because they're good and I can afford to pay that. The 2 that are okay, I'm going to leave it the same. And the one that's bad, I'm going to knock that person's out and I'm going to put someone else in. And so by moving to a pay-for-performance kind of buying and marketing model, what it allows you to do is if you use data to evaluate it, to improve and constantly be, incrementally improving the ROI that you get. And if you do that for 6 to 9 months, you're going to wake up and you're going to have an ad program that works really, really well.
Perfect. So we're 3 minutes over, so thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you to Chris and Matt for presenting and the entire Appcast team. You guys know you're awesome. So once again, recording slides will be in your inbox tomorrow morning. Thanks, and hope everyone has a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.